You guys have watched Critical Role, right? You, excuse me, you haven't? Okay, go do that. Go watch like an episode or something, then come back to me. Okay, that isn't because you need to do your homework for this video or anything. That's just because if you play D&D, I think you should watch Critical Role just so that you get an idea of the most popular show. You can steal ideas from it, you can do all sorts with it. But we're not exactly here to talk specifically about that. I wanted to use the example of the concept of Critical Role as a show. Something that a regular viewer of the show might notice is that the core party sticks together the entire time. The only time where that kind of properly changes in a deliberate way is the Slayer's Take storyline near the beginning of Campaign 1, where I think it had changed because Matt Mercer had a lot of friends that wanted to get in on the game and play a couple sessions, so he decided, let's kill a bunch of birds with one stone and just throw the story into a loop for 5 sessions so that everyone can get a little bit of like a taste of it. And that caused some people to come back and stuff, and he did this by splitting the party in two. And that's what we're going to be talking about today, the concept of the side story, the concept of taking some members of the party, maybe even one, and giving them their own personal story that may involve other players or may simply be a shorter branching off storyline in the larger grand scheme of things. So to do this, I'm going to first talk about an example of something that I've done. There was a borderline TPK that happened in my adventure about maybe 10 sessions ago or something that it really ruined a lot of things, and the only one to survive properly and continue in the adventure was Iravir. He is the only character that has stuck from the start into the rest of the game. That seems to be a theme in mine. It tends to be because I play enemies really smart and my players usually don't have that much time to gel before I slaughter their asses, so that's something that I'm working on. But I had continued the adventure with just this Iravir character, introducing one other player. That's it. That's the only player I introduced for 2 whole sessions, because at another time in the week I was running a one-shot with 2 of the other players, introducing their characters in a unique way. I had set up this scenario of them being hired for a train heist, and they did it all in one session without any combat. And it created a lot of interesting scenarios. And I wanted to talk about some of the benefits of having this smaller party join up with a larger one, which is what eventually happened for the larger storyline, which I'm calling the Hunt for the Platinum Bangle, which is this whole huge thing about finding an old artifact from an ancient society and stuff like that. So there's long-term implications that came from that. There is one of the characters found a zombified version of their old friend, and they're trying to currently figure out how to get them back, and they're making good progress actually, and that is what I had used to unite both of the groups, because one of the other party members in the other group didn't exactly have a solution, but was their solution. So that's what kind of stuck them together, and we're like, well, if you're going to help us, then I guess we'll stick around. And the other thing was I set up a potential Warlock patron for one of the characters who, in our little Session 0 discussion, she had said, well, I kind of want to do, Hexblade Paladin mix-up, which is absolutely fine. Some people are like, oh no, but I don't care. Play powerful characters. I played a Moon Druid Barbarian once, and it was the most fun I've had playing in combat in D&D, full stop. But, from there, she was like, I don't really know how to fit the classes together and make this build with the stats that I rolled. So I said, start out all Paladin, all 5 levels in Paladin, and we'll find a way to introduce your patron organically. And that's what we did. That one shot was also a way of introducing their patron, which came in the form of a strange artifact that was powering a flesh golem that was currently inactive that they'd taken. And it was also in the form of an extra orb that at some point could have been nurtured into a magic item, but they'd given that away. So, who knows what that's going to be. But it made sense in character because they'd gone around for months and nobody could identify it. So it's like, but yeah, they had long-term implications on the whole story. And the Warhammer, which is the packed weapon because she wanted to go Hexblade, actually got stolen by a fire giant who had defeated her and nicked it and was like, okay, I'm keeping this, throw you out, don't come back. Because he wanted to use that as kind of a bargaining chip. I have your almost dead friend here, I can kill her, but I'm going to give you back her in exchange for a bunch of your gear. So there were just 2 of them. and they had we'd established that these two characters had met before, but they weren't exactly good friends or anything, so it was good for them to get to know each other. And also, only having two characters there really drowned out a lot of the white noise of inter-party discussion, and really got down to the whole basis of personal motivation, and their goals and their aspirations and stuff like that. And we got pretty well into those, actually, because there were only two people to talk about them. You were only talking about these aspirations to one other person, so it didn't feel as overwhelming as the entire party needs to know now and stuff like that. There can be like guests, right? So if you have a bunch of people that want to play D&D, which I do, there is always someone in my life that wants to play D&D that I currently either can't get into my games or don't want to. I'm kidding. But I'm in a performing arts course, and everyone in that bloody course is interested in it. Just everyone I mention it to is like, yeah, I'll give it a go, because we're all actors and that's what we do. And if you want to get some more of your friends into D&D, or you've got some old friends that you played D&D with and don't anymore, and you're like, hey, I'm running this thing, you want to come in? It's a good way of doing it. So if you want to, say, for this little one-shot that I did with these two characters that were later introduced into the main story, if I wanted them to have some kind of foil, a one-session nemesis or something, I'm like, hey, old friend who played a really good evil character, want to come and be a little bit of an antagonist for me? And they could use an old character or something if they have it lying around, or they could make a new one and kind of be in this little one-shotty thing, and if they survive, continue to be in the story, maybe show up at a later point. And that's kind of where it might start getting a little scary in terms of scheduling. I personally always try and keep my sessions on a regular schedule, once a week on this day at this time. It can be malleable if you have more friends that want to come in temporarily or more permanently, if other people can also do that time. And it's perfectly fine. I think people are more than willing to take a little bit of a break and wait for that extra few days to get that session going, if it means they get to bring an extra player or two along for the ride. I know I'd be a lot more willing to give an extra whole week if it's like, oh, I actually want to introduce this new guy, but we wanted to properly work on our character, and it's last minute. Sorry, guys. Do it, man. Give us an extra player. Screw that. So I think that one reason that you might want to do this side quest thing is that sometimes a party isn't going to agree on everything. My party is actually pretty split in terms of alignment. There's two characters who are objectively good, or at least they're trying to be, and there are two that are on the more neutral side. They still want to do good, but their own perception of it instead of the objective truth of helping people and stuff like that. And sometimes they may not fully align, get along, and inter-party conflict can sometimes be hard to deal with in terms of they still have to then long rest with each other, or they have to continue through the dungeon, or stuff like that. So I think giving your players the freedom and saying, hello, yes, you guys can squabble and you guys can straight up split up, because there's a lot of fun narratives that can come out of that. And granted, it might mean an overall net less D&D for the two groups that eventually form, maybe 3, maybe 4, maybe, I don't know, however big your party is. I think it would be worth it in the grand scheme of things to kind of split things up, give them their own personal stories, and then bring them back. The Civil War comics for the Marvel series are so good because of those years and years and years of those characters being built up and you understanding all of their emotions. If you've read all of the comics, you know why Captain America's taking the stance that he is. You know why Spider-Man switches sides, etc., etc. And I think that all of these different things have culminated from the fact that they've had their own personal stories that feel more tailored to them, that didn't necessarily also have to involve bringing Hulk or Hawkeye along with them and stuff like that. So I think that's just something to consider. Contained stories can feel a lot more personal and therefore lead to more obvious character development. I find that D&D is actually quite hard to find character development in if you're not fully like... so for example, some of my players I find usually don't actually... Their characters don't really change that much over the course of the story. I'm personally a huge fan of character change, but some people keep them pretty stagnant throughout the whole thing, which is absolutely fine. Some characters don't have to change. Again, in both the comics and the films, Captain America rarely changes at all, sticks to his principles, and will naturally adapt to the story and stuff like that, but is always grounded and in that same spot. And where was I going with this? The point is, it gives you more personal development if your player's more into the idea of having their characters change. I personally think I had a character a while back who is now dead, RIP, because that seems to happen with a lot of my characters, because I play risky because it's fun. And he was struggling with faith because of a whole backstory thing with a dead girlfriend who was faithful, and he was kind of trying to live through that a little bit and give her a new life or whatever. It was very complicated, and part of his journey was figuring out what faith meant to him and how he could use that, and realizing, oh, maybe this god that she worshipped isn't really for me. And that's kind of where he hit, and then he died. So that kind of progression was pretty neat, and I think it could have happened a lot faster and in a lot cooler way if that was split up from the rest. Now, I'm not saying you need to split the party up in order to give them more personal stories and stuff like that, but I think if you tell a party member straight up, we're going to do this side thing based on this, hell yeah. That's kind of what I've done. A bit spoilery for the Sunday games, so if you don't want those, get out. But one of my players has a whole backstory in the city that we're going back to after the current adventure, and I'm deciding to build on that. And I'm sending him down there, and he's going to have a pretty personal adventure with a lot of old friends, you know what I mean? A lot of people that he didn't exactly get along with, and I think that could be some great development for him and stuff like that. So sure, go for it if you want. Give a character a personal side quest. But then again, if the entire party is so supportive and they're like... Because if your party's going for 100 sessions, right, and they've been doing their own things and they've joined back together, they probably won't want to leave again if they've done it a couple times, because they're like, right, we've got everyone here, let's stick together for that classic final whole, right, we're a group now, we've had our own stories, we've developed ourselves, let's focus on this saving the world stuff or whatever you're about to do. So this might actually involve players sitting out, which as a player, I'm perfectly fine with. Some people will not want to do that. So if they're like, right, my character has no reason to be with you, but I want to play D&D, so I'm going to figure out why. That's perfectly fine. If a player's like, right, I only play in this game a week, can I stay, please? Figure out a way to do that. You want your players fun over the story any day. And if you're thinking, I really want to do this personal side story, and you're like, but I want to do it like split up so that they can have a cool reunion and stuff like that. Don't do it just for the sake of this cool reunion idea, this cool, oh, I've watched the MCU and they don't always star in the same films together, so I want to try that. It should serve something. So I think don't do it without a reason and just forbid some of your players from playing in the main game for a bit, you know what I mean? But if you're perfectly okay with it, rescheduling with them and running 2 games at once, go for it. If you feel like you have the time and energy for that, do it. I can definitely recommend it. So I think a good example for how this is actually quite satisfying for the DM is if you watch the Hawkeye TV series. I'm using Marvel a lot for these sorts of examples because they're brilliant in terms of their own individual stories and storytelling through that sort of medium. But it has an original Avenger, so it's got one of the core party members on their own personal story. It's got a new character, so this DM had a friend that wanted to play, and they're like, okay, we'll introduce you, we'll do this cool apprentice narrative. And an old villain that never died that the DM wanted to reuse. I've got a couple of those lying around in my world right now, old villains that never properly got took care of, that I don't think will get involved with the party again, so I could involve it with a completely different story. So that's kind of a good example of what to go off if that's something that you want to do. And I think doing these sorts of side stories, if you don't have that many people that actually want to play D&D, I wouldn't really recommend it, because you might end up having other players playing multiple characters in the same world, and that can get confusing. I know a couple mates who have about 3 or 4 characters running around our Forgotten Realms world right now, and it's quite awkward. And if they were to meet, the player would be like jumping from character to character, and that's the DM's job. The players shouldn't really be controlling any more than 2 people at once, I think. And that second person is usually like a minor NPC. They shouldn't really care about that much. And finally, fun break as a DM, because likely these side stories aren't going to be world-ending or party-threatening threats, right? Because if they were, then the whole group would be together. So giving yourself time to go for these smaller, more fun narratives to you personally, rather than the big epic dragon destroying the world, or mind flayers destroying the world, or vampire, you know what I mean. It's a fun break, and I think you should try it if you think that the story would be owed to it. and that you could tell a more interesting overall tale with that medium. So thank you for watching. I was going to do a video on this last week, but unfortunately I had a bunch of shows, and I still did, but they've just finished, and I wasn't as tired after these ones. Although I really was after, because it was a panto, and our prince suddenly decided to have COVID, so I filled in, and I mucked up a little bit, I'll be honest, because I had about a day to learn the script. But I've kind of got that post-show adrenaline, so uploads should be fine now. I'm thinking once a week, maybe. And they're going to be completely random. I might decide at some point to not do a D&D video, which is nuts to me. But I've kind of removed all the D&D branding from the channel, basically. And I've just said, okay, it's a nerd channel now. You know what I mean? But hey, if you like this, like and subscribe and all the fancy stuff, because it would genuinely help me out a lot, and I'd appreciate it. It's not just boost my numbers. It makes me feel like what I'm making is good. Thank you guys for watching. See ya.